Hello and welcome back to Forza Horizon 5 with a bit of an investigation. The motorsport franchise is always about the racing. It's the closest to a sim Forza has, while the Horizon games are all about having fun, open world, nice lively attitude, but that doesn't mean that motorsport has a monopoly on race cars. You see, over the years, various racing disciplines have trickled their way in. Horizon 5 is no exception. We have quite a large variety. And I wanted to see if any of the road cars that those race cars are based on can beat the race cars themselves. Now there's a caveat right away. I wanted to do off-road racing included, primarily with the Bronco and the Bronco R and the Ranger T6. However, the class disparity was way too big, and it wasn't even competitive or interesting because they're basically an entire class apart. So, we're not doing off-road in that sense, which is a shame. I wish we did. I wish we could. But it just wasn't interesting. But I will kind of go off-road in the sense of the trails, because we're starting off with rallying. And in the rallying world, we have the Porsche 959 and the Porsche 959 Dakar. I know it's more rally raid than rally, but work with me here, alright? I want it to be interesting. Now, this is, on paper, not a very fair fight. The normal road car makes 50 more horsepower, it has 20 more PI, it's 200 pounds lighter. However, it's on road tires, and from the factory, the Dakar is on off-road racing tires, essentially. So, it's going to have a lot more traction. You can see, the 959 road car is slithering about. Yeah, it's all-wheel drive, and it's based on a need for rallying world, but it's still a road car. It's still got sport tires. I can't imagine driving this with rear-wheel drive. Luckily, this is all-wheel drive, and it really struggles even with that. The Dakar didn't really have those issues, so while it was down on power and down on the power-to-weight ratio, it didn't really matter, because it could carry the speed through the corners, and then we have the bumps. This course is not too bad. I specifically built a course that was not crazy bumpy, but you can see there, a combination of a lack of grip and a bump on the inside meant that I went a little wide, and it just, things like that. It's not terrible. This is, again, an all-wheel drive car, so it's not like it's undrivable. It's just not fast, that's all. Which means that, despite everything stacked against it, the Dakar took the victory by a healthy 2.1 seconds faster, in fact. Very interesting. I thought that this would be a good example. Obviously, if this is on tarmac, it would be a completely different story and the road car would butcher it. But it's not. Because I chose each event based off of the vehicle that it's designed for. The racing vehicle is designed for off-road rallying, then I guess we're going on a rally stage. And that means, despite the road car's best effort, and it was a valiant effort, it wasn't enough. So yeah, a 206 versus a 2039. It is close for being such different tires, but close does not mean faster than. Next up is the TCR cars. I could have gone with the Cyan Racing, but I wanted to go with the MG X Power, and this certainly had the odds stacked against it for the road car, to say the least. If I expected the 959 to have the road car victorious because of the PI disparity, this one was definitely favoring the racing car. This was nearing the limit of, should I even run this? But I wanted to use both the new cars for something because it's rare to have both the road car and the race car released almost simultaneously. So the road car has less power, but more torque, and it's a lot heavier, 3,400 pounds. But the race car has 340 horsepower, but less torque because it's naturally aspirated per the regulations, but it weighs less, and it has more aero, which means it's at the very top of A-class versus the road car's 716. Like I said, the odds were stacked against it. One thing of note, though, the TCR car, certainly the MG, was not as nice to drive as I thought it would be. We're using stock tuning setups for all the race cars. And, I don't really like how it drives at all, actually, because if you notice, you should pay attention next time it goes around the corner. The rear wheel, the rear inside wheel of the corner, will lift up like a hot hatch, which is something I did not expect on a race car, much less a racing sedan. And that throws the balance off on the corner. It's really funky to drive. I'm not a particularly big fan of it, if I'm honest. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. The TCR car is just so much better to drive. One thing it's better to drive, it's just faster. Just more grip, better brakes. And because it's naturally aspirated, it has a smoother power band, so it's able to stay on the power more. All in all, the road car didn't stand a hope in hell. It was good fun, and I kind of find it intriguing, the weird tricycle action that the race car does. The road car didn't have those issues because of soft suspension. Maybe something to do with the tires with the suspension for the race car? I don't know. Super weird, kind of interesting to play around with. But, yeah, the race car absolutely smoked it, even if it was being a tricycle. Sort of sticking in a similar vein, at least in terms of specs, we have the KTM crossbows, both the R and the GT4 car that competes in the European Endurance Championships. This was still a big gap, but not as big as the TCR car. The road car is 802, while the race car is 845 PI. The race car makes more power, but it has the exact same torque as the road car, 295 versus 295. But one thing of interest, because the crossbow road car is basically just an exoskeleton, kind of like the Aerial Atom, it weighs less than 1,800 pounds. It is nearly 500 pounds lighter than the race car, which is weird, because you would think race cars are always lighter than the road cars, but the KTM is the other way around. The road car is significantly lighter than the race car, and I thought that might give the competitive edge. I know that the GT4 car is unbelievably grippy in the Horizon games, like almost OP levels of grip. It has no power, has no acceleration, but it doesn't matter if you carry that much grip. And, yeah, it didn't matter. The road car just doesn't have the same turn. It doesn't have the same downforce because there's no bodywork of any kind. And it does not have the same tires. I was debating on putting everyone on the same tire compound so the 959 would get rally tires and then everything else would get race tires. But I like that would sort of ruin the spirit of the competition in some ways, having the race tires on the road car. But it didn't matter. It was close. This has been the closest so far. Both these two cars were within 2 seconds of each other. A 50.9 for the KTM road car and a 49.0 for the GT4 car. So it's close, and I think the road car deserves a lot of praise for being that close to a super grippy race car around a mildly technical track. I try to find balanced tracks based off what vehicle is suited, and this one it has some acceleration zones to help the lack of aero on the road car, while also having a really tight twisty section in the second half. But it's just too grippy, the KTM race car. It's just way too grippy, and the road car isn't. For our penultimate challenge in this challenge, we jump from GT4 to GT3 with the Moslers, the MT900S and the MT900 GT3. And the road car is actually higher PI, 919 versus 910. And that's because it has more power, 10 horsepower more, 10 more torque, and once again, super weird, it's actually lighter than the road race car. Maybe it's just a selection that we have of both types of vehicles in Horizon, but this is the third car that has been lighter than the race car. Weird. In fact, 4 out of these 5 vehicles are lighter than their racing equivalents, even though race cars don't have to follow the same laws for emissions, or noise, or comfort, because they're race cars. But apparently they're heavier. I know they got roll cages, but still. Now I chose this track because I wanted to tackle the high-speed corners. Moslers are notoriously good at high-speed cornering. The Goliath especially was dominated by Moslers in Horizon 4 and to a lesser extent in Horizon 5. And there is one other element. It's a very fast track. These cars only have 530 horsepower, which is a lot. But when the Mosler GT3 car has a lot of drag, it's not a lot. And that means all that aero, which helps it go flat out through most of the entire track, really hampers it on the straightaways, and it simply cannot make that time up loss on the straightaways because of the drag. So the road car may only have 10 horsepower more, but it's able to maximize that 10 horsepower to the fullest. Which means, despite the odds, and despite the fallacies of higher PI vehicles being proven wrong in the past, the Mosler road car was faster than the race car, 59.6 versus a 101.0. So it's considerably faster. I thought the GT3 car would be able to carry so much corner speed it would be able to make up the difference, but no. It is simply not fast enough in a straight line. And the road car is just good enough handling, because it is still a Mosler that weighs 2,400 pounds after all, around the corners, to make up for that deficit of downforce. So there we go, it's not impossible. A road car was faster than its racing counterpart, which gave me some really big false hopes for our final comparison, the Ferrari 488 Pista versus the Ferrari 488 Corsa Cliente. It's not the full FIA GTE car that competes at Le Mans. This is their one-make racing privateer feeder series for that FIA class. And this one, after the Mosler, gave me some hope. Because, yeah, sure, the Corsa Cliente is higher in PI than the Pista. However, the Pista has 50 more horsepower, 6 more torque, and once again, it's 200 pounds lighter. Because race cars are weird, I found out today. And I thought, well, that could do it. I picked a very mixed track. It's got a twisty section, but it also has a very long straightaway. Very high speeds, almost hitting 180 miles an hour in the Pista. And I thought, this has it. It'll be close because the Pista is a very good handling car, but it's not quite 488 Corsa Cliente handling. And then it can rocket away down the straights. It has this. It's got low drag compared to the race car. It's set. The race car was faster in a straight line. I don't understand it either. It must be gearing. That's all I can think of, because I don't know why the race car is faster than the road car in a straight line. That's super weird. It has less horsepower and more drag, so it's gotta be the gearing. I don't understand it. You probably don't understand it unless you're an engineering guy. Even I am an engineering guy and I don't fully understand that, which is why I'm going with the gear ratios logic. Because again, all these vehicles are bone stock, which means that the racing car has its stock aero, its stock sequential gearbox. And it was faster in a straight line, which means as soon as it was faster in a straight line, the Pista was done. It had no chance. Because it had to make up its time on the straightaway, and if it didn't, it was screwed because of lack of aero. And yeah, it got annihilated. I would have loved for the Pista to score a second win, to at least make it a 2-3 for race cars overall for the win, versus a 1-4. It was a 1-4 by a lot. By a very big lot. The Pista, while it is a very impressive car in the supercar shootout, it put up a bloody good fight to the Aventador, to the GT2 RS. Over here, against its racing brethren, not so much. The Pista did a 55.9. The Cliente did a 53.9. So again, it's not as big of a disparity as the Mosler as to 959. But as soon as you see that straightaway speed for the race car, I knew it was done. So there you go. It is exceptionally difficult to beat a race car with a road car, funnily enough. Not impossible, and I'm sure if there was a different track, each one of these vehicles have different outcomes, because the Dakar was stronger in the corners because of its tire composition. The Mosler was stronger on its track, the road car was anyway, because of the high speeds that it reached and the lack of downforce. If the KTM, actually I think the KTM would win no matter what because it has more power, but the Ferrari, if it had a much longer, like Le Mans style straightaway, it probably would have beat the Cliente. Yeah, it's obviously a game of what do you choose, what is what, do you tune it, do you have a high-speed track, do you have a mixture track, do you have a technical track? So obviously there's lots of variables, but it was just really a fun experiment to see what could beat what in some respects. And the answer is race cars. 80% of the time will win. But that'll be it for this episode of Forza Horizon 5. I'll be back with more